The Enormous Tiny Experiment, written by Anna Tikvah. Chapter 1. 3 Messages. Evan quickly scanned the mirrored hallway. No one was in sight. It was still early in the morning. Quickly he pressed the green icon on his cell phone, and immediately the tile floor dropped away below his feet. In a flash, the tall blonde scientist was in the secret tunnel, and the floor was back in place. It was the quickest way to get down to the underground laboratory. It was hard to see in the dark tunnel with only tiny lights along the ceiling to guide his way. With 2 long strides, he reached the door. Hearing a series of beeps, he checked his messages. He had received 3 from Professor Lemans. Check the kids. Ask Louis to replace the Wonder Drink. Bring up all the rest of the trees. We'll plant them today. Will do, Evan texted in reply. Using the flashlight on his cell phone, Evan lit up the number pad. He stooped over to punch in the secret code, 0suffering66. A heavy metal door creaked open, and the young scientist entered the secret chamber. As of yet, no one knew about the hidden laboratory and what went on below the floors of the rainforest biosphere, except himself and the professor. On his left-hand side were high-tech computers, a gamma-ray irradiator, incubators, hospital apparatus, test tubes, and much more. On his right were a series of nurseries set up high at shoulder level. Nearest to him was the human nursery with 4 separate rooms, then the animal section with 10 compartments, and finally the greenhouse was positioned under a long, deep skylight. Stopping at the human nursery first, Evan looked through the glass. There, in 3 visible rooms, each about the length of one of his arms and 3 hands high, 20 miniaturized children played happily. The tinies, as they called them, had been brought into existence only 10 months ago, yet they were already functioning at the level of 10-year-old children. While the professor did not fully understand the reason for this rapid development, he and Evan had various theories. For a few minutes, Evan observed the activities. 4 girls and 1 boy were reading a book about going to a farm. The book was much bigger than they were. Evan had tried to find the smallest books possible to fill their library stand, but even the smallest books were taller than the children. Sitting on the corners of the book to keep it open, the children read and admired the pictures. Ponzi, Odin, and several other boys were busy building forts out of toothpicks and blue tack. The rest of the tinies were drawing pictures with pipsqueak markers that rose above their heads. Standing up with a marker tucked under their arms, they were able to walk around the piece of paper and make large drawings. On the wall behind them, many pictures were on display. Scribble drawings had come first, then crude shapes, and now Evan was often amazed by their ability. Knocking on the glass to catch their attention, all of the children, except Odin and Ponzi, eagerly looked up and waved when they saw Evan's smiling face. Ponzi and Odin glanced over, but they didn't see the need to acknowledge his presence. Stooping over to speak into the microphone, Evan called out, "How's it going, kids? Are you having a good day in there?" The microphone was positioned under the window. Evan always had to stoop. Santa showed him the picture she was coloring. She put it right up against the glass. Bright green eyes with long, exaggerated black lashes looked back at Evan, and a big red smile stretched across the round face. However, it was the blonde, spiky hair that best represented her subject. The hair filled in the top corners of the page. "It's you," she said proudly. "Wow, I like it," Evan smiled, self-consciously flattening his unruly hair. "Nice job in the eyes. They're hard to get right." Santa looked pleased. Dark-skinned, with big brown eyes, Santa was special to Evan, even if he didn't want to admit to having favorites. He had wanted to call her Sarah after his sister, but the professor had been adamant that no names from any supposed holy book would be used. Instead, they had carefully chosen names to suit various nationalities of the children. The project was a multiracial experiment and would have been even more so had all 50 embryos developed successfully. Vinitha also had a picture she wanted to show Evan. He marveled at the realistic features and the black hair she had drawn neatly on the head. "Is this like the professor?" she asked, looking up shyly from under her long ebony tresses. Sucking in his breath, Evan was amazed by her skill. "Well, he used to have," Evan began with a smile, and then he stopped himself. The professor didn't want the children to know what he looked like. "Perhaps," he replied. Braiding her copper-brown hair, Amy asked, "Is there really a professor?" Her blue eyes were probing. "Oh yes," Evan nodded. "The professor is the mastermind of paradise. I'm only his helper." Vanitha and Amy looked at each other in amazement. "He sounds very important," Amy stated. "Much more important than I am," Evan assured her. Lanky Franz and the dark-skinned, hefty Lima banged on the window, loudly complaining that the other kids weren't sharing the toys. Damien, the strongest boy, said that roly-poly Odin had hit him again. Whining unhappily, Dia, the dark-haired princess, said she was bored and didn't know what to do, and there were at least 10 other complaints. Evan tried to work through the issues one by one. It had been a lot of work managing so many children at once. Louis, the oldest by more than 4 years, had borne the brunt of the burden inside the nursery. But thankfully, each labor-intensive stage had not lasted long. Diapering and feeding 20 infants had been an enormous challenge, and several photographs of the early weeks sat on the professor's desk. It had been quite an amazing sight to see, especially when 20 tiny babies lay side by side, holding their own bottles. On the far wall of the nursery was a picture Louis had drawn of himself managing all the bumbling toddlers. For the first 2 months, Louis had been exhausted. Once they were walking and beginning to talk, it had become more manageable. Now, for the most part, Louis was enjoying his role and had a good relationship with the children. Evan liked to help him out over the microphone when he could. He hoped that when the magnificent domed terrarium was finished, all the kids would be fully entertained. The nursery they had lived in for the last 10 months was cramped and very plain. "There will be so much to explore and discover in our magnificent world," he thought to himself. "Hopefully he'll be ready tomorrow. Surely then there won't be so many squabbles." Looking around, Evan spotted the oldest Tiny in a corner by the library stand. The biggest books, no taller than Evan's hand, were still above Louis's head. Reaching up, he was pulling and pushing the reading material to one side to see what each one was about. "He's probably choosing a story for school tomorrow," Evan deduced. Louis was the first Tiny that Professor Lemans had created, exactly 4 years and 10 months previous. Many years of research and experimentation had taken place before the first little Tiny had been successfully born. While doing his master's degree at Greenville University in Ontario, investigating plant genetics and cell division, Professor Jacques Lemans had surprised himself when a miniature geranium experiment took root and lived. Years later, as a professor in the same Canadian university, his secret research had developed the process to create a tiny dog. However, the dog hadn't lived long. After numerous experimental failures, the professor had finally discovered that miniature mammals required a carefully calibrated oxygen content, higher than regular mammals. Once he had determined how to keep his miniaturized creation alive, the professor had used the same unpublished process on human reproductive cells that had been donated for specific research. While this process was unethical, the professor had justified his actions due to the benefits he believed his research project would provide to science and the study of human behavior. Again, it took many unsuccessful attempts before a tiny fetus had developed into a real, fully functioning baby boy, only 2 centimeters tall. Louis had been born nearly 4 years before the others in an incubator. From embryo to baby took less than a month, and the baby boy had continued to develop at this alarming rate. Now 10 centimeters tall and gray-haired, Louis was a full-grown Tiny of 58 months. Professor Lemans had been promising him a world of his own ever since he'd been old enough to communicate. With access to other human reproductive material donated with full consent to the university for unrestricted scientific research, the other Tinies had come into existence. Much research and labor had been expended on the enormous terrarium the 2 scientists were preparing for multiple Tinies to inhabit. This new world, fondly referred to as paradise, was almost ready. "Hey, Louis," Evan said, speaking into the microphone. "Have you replaced the wonder drink in the main machine?" "We just did it," Louis smiled, turning around and heading toward the window. "The children were great helpers." "What else can we do, Uncle Louis?" Nancy asked, her bright blue eyes sparkling. Sturdy and very capable, brown-haired Nancy loved to be busy. She kept the nursery well organized. "Time for school," Uncle Louis said in his gentle but firm way. "We have an important lesson today about water." Like the stuff we drink? Franz asked. Yes, Uncle Louis replied, tousling the boy's stringy brown hair. But in paradise, there will be so much water in some places that you will need to learn how to stay safe when you play in it. Play in it? Franz went wild with the thought, jumping up and down. I can't wait to see paradise. He rushed over to tell his friends that they would get to play in water. The copper-haired girl nearby was more excited to hear that it was time for school. Yay for school, Amy sang, clapping her hands. I love school, Uncle Louis. Uncle Louis laughed happily. He could always count on Amy's enthusiasm. The others looked happy, but maybe not quite so keen. Yu-Yan, Tina, and Vinitha had returned to read books in the far corner of the room, and many of the boys had resumed building forts. Kenzie's white, freckled face and gray eyes were peering excitedly through the glass. How long till we go into paradise? He asked Evan. We're planting a few more trees today, the tall scientist relayed through the microphone. And then all that will be left to do is to introduce the animals to their new habitat. By tomorrow, if all goes well, we'll have it ready for you. Really? Tomorrow? Kenzie asked. Just one more sleep? When Evan nodded his head, Kenzie went running to share his good news with the other children. Soon almost everyone was cheering and dancing around, almost everyone except the quiet girls who were reading, and Odin and Ponzi, who rarely joined in on any group activities. Waving goodbye to the children, Evan passed by the bird and animal nursery, quickly looking through the glass panes to see that everything looked okay. The beagle puppy was chasing the rabbits, and so far he hadn't eaten any. Squirrels scolded high up on the climbing apparatus, and the colorful birds flew back and forth. Chickens, ducks, and loons were pecking grain from the floor. The deer, sheep, and cow were guzzling breakfast from the rubber teats on the formula machine. We've got to get paradise in working order by tomorrow, Evan encouraged himself. Tomorrow was the last day of their summer vacation. Since the beginning of May, Evan and the professor had been working overtime to have things operational before classes resumed. To fulfill the professor's third request, Evan moved on to the small greenhouse nursery, where they had been developing miniature plants for the last 3 years. While the undisclosed lab and nurseries were located below ground level, the greenhouse was positioned under a 15-meter skylight. Above, on the main floor of the glass rainforest biome, the skylight was part of a decorative rectangular glass prism, surrounded on all sides with cascading plants. No one knew of its special purpose below. The whole project had to remain well concealed. Professor Lemans was very concerned that if anything leaked out to the media, it would be shut down before he had opportunity to set it all in motion. He was well aware of the protests that might arise if word got out that he was developing tiny humans who aged incredibly fast and would be kept in captivity. Yet captivity was vital, since the tinies required a higher concentration of oxygen than regular humans. He knew full well the tinies wouldn't survive more than an hour in the Earth's regular atmosphere. Professor Lemans was confident that one day scientists would come from all over the world to study human behavior in his newly perfect world. He was fully convinced that a world with no calamities, no unfair suffering or restrictions would result in the happiest human life possible. Humans, he often told Evan, will thrive in a beautiful, safe environment unencumbered by any authoritarian rules. Donning protective gloves and a mask, Evan collected the 300 tiny trees they had produced using Professor Lemans' genetic engineering process. He walked into the elevator and pressed the arrow to head up. Chapter 2. Finishing Touches. Riding the elevator up to the main floor, Evan waited for the doors to slide open. In the massive Greenville University biosphere, stretching over 100 hectares and consisting of several unique habitats filled with living plants and animals from all over the globe, the professor's most important laboratory was located in the middle of the glass rainforest biome. The Paradise Room, as he called it, was about the size of a small house and so far very well concealed. When the elevator shaft opened, Evan walked into the bright greenhouse enclosure, which housed the enormous domed terrarium. As always, a stately painting of the professor was the first thing to come into view. In Evan's opinion, the painter had copied Jack's European features quite accurately, even if he had generously darkened the now nearly white goatee and short grey hair. Seeing the professor in a crisp black suit like the one in the painting was extremely rare, but it did give him a handsome appearance. Copies of this painting hung in 2 other places in the Greenville biosphere. Everyone knew that without Jacques Lemans' foresight and generous donations toward the inception of the university biosphere, it may never have been built. 15 years previous, when Jacques had first discovered how to create a tiny geranium, he had also inherited an enormous sum of money. His father, who was 45 years older, had been a brilliant computer software developer who had always wished he'd been a scientist and was very proud of his son's achievements. When he and Jack's mother had died in a terrible car accident, leaving a multi-million-dollar inheritance to their only son, one important stipulation was attached. The stipulation was that the money could only be spent to further scientific research. Eager to continue his own research and to provide ample opportunity for others, the professor had persuaded the Greenville University to build the large rainforest biome on their vacant rolling hills. With the help of his cousin, an architect-engineer, the first biome had emerged in spectacular fashion, encouraging a nationwide contribution to build the 2 other glass structures, now housing the desert and Arctic tundra biomes. Now 3 fully enclosed, freestanding glass structures, complete with live animals and birds, stood within walking distance of the university. They were surrounded by natural Canadian gardens, displaying the boreal and deciduous forests, tundra, and wildflowers. Already, the Greenville biosphere was becoming a notable research and education center during the university semesters, and a major tourist location over the holidays. While most of the other university staff were aware that the Professor Lemans had a private room in the middle of the rainforest biome, no one knew about the underground chambers and laboratories. Hidden entrances and exits had concealed the secret research project from nearly everyone. Evan was the only student that Professor Lemans had ever dared trust with his incredibly important venture. They both hoped that one day soon, paradise might be the biosphere's main attraction. With this long-term vision in mind, the northern wall of the large upstairs room was a glass viewing area. It was attached to a large, still unrevealed hall, which also served as the acknowledged entrance to Professor Lemans' private office. His name tag was fixed to the locked door, but no one except he and Evan had ever entered. It had all been purposely designed for the day when the whole world would be invited to view the one and only miniature paradise. "Here are the trees, sir," Evan said, bringing the tray over. Pulling on a new pair of disposable latex gloves and donning a mask, Professor Lemans prepared for the last planting in paradise. It was crucial that they didn't contaminate the new world with any virus or unwanted bacteria. He picked up tweezers and a soft brush from his desk. "Thank you," he said excitedly. "Let's get them in." A button on the wall lowered the sides of the curved glass dome. About 50 meters in circumference, it took the professor 60 casual strides to walk all the way around the circular terrarium. Inside, the professor had created a lake that stretched fully across the south end, complete with a wave simulator monitored from the lab computer. They had already stocked the lake with miniature fish of the best eating variety, perch, bass, trout, and freshwater salmon. A 35-centimeter wide strip of fine white sand lay all along the vast shoreline. "I can't wait to see the tinies build boats," Professor Lemans chuckled as he pressed the trigger on his lift pod to get inside the dome. "It's going to be so fun watching them enjoy our world," Evan agreed. The dome terrarium had been especially prepared with privacy window film all around the sides, while the overhead glass was transparent. Standing outside the terrarium, looking in, the glass was perfectly clear from every direction. Standing inside the terrarium, the sun, moon, and stars were perfectly visible above day and night, since the dome was situated within the greenhouse glass of the biome. However, around the sides the glass was tinted. The tinies would be unable to see anyone watching them, unless, and very unlikely, someone was able to climb 12 meters up the greenhouse structure and look in from the roof. Drones had been banned in the vicinity. Believing strongly that one day everyone would be interested in studying his new creation, Professor Lemans had used the privacy window film to ensure the tinies could be observed without their knowledge. He wanted an accurate assessment of their day-to-day life. Tiptoeing carefully inside, trying to stand only on the sandy beach and avoid crushing Evan's newly constructed wooden schoolhouse, the professor reached toward the hills. He was planting the rest of the trees on the west side of the dome. The lovely forested hills would cleanse the air and provide an enjoyable habitat. Evan leaned over the lowered glass wall of the dome with his long arm outstretched and handed the professor 3 more eucalyptus. Little trees were about the size of his index finger. "These are doing well," he said. "It's amazing how quickly everything matures." "It is," Professor Lemans smiled, carefully tamping the eucalyptus trees into the rich soil. "I do believe it's the pent-up energy." Evan agreed. He and the professor favored the theory that the miniaturized cells of the tinies, pre-programmed to produce something 30 to 40 times larger, directed their restricted energy into an accelerated maturity. The professor interspersed the eucalyptus among the blue spruce and pines. The professor hadn't produced every species of tree for the hills, just a few which would remain green all year long. He had been much more liberal in the orchard. An abundant variety of fruit trees from all over the world were already well established in the farmland. While he was planting the trees, Evan told the professor about the children's portraits and the conversation he'd had with 3 of the girls. "They're very curious about you," Evan explained. "That's just fine," the professor replied, planting another eucalyptus. "But we need to remain detached. This is first and foremost a research project. You know how close I've become to Louis." Evan nodded. He knew the plan was for the project to operate under the auspices of naturalistic observational research, but he yearned to stay involved. "Louis has become like your son," he agreed. "And I don't want that to happen with these new tinies. I will need to stay close to Louis and communicate with him, but the others need to stay independent from me and you. From this point on, we can't let our involvement tarnish our research. And anyhow, I do believe they will all function better without any higher power intimidating them, or making rules, or governing in any way." "I know," Evan smiled, having heard this speech numerous times. "You want the tinies to function with Louis as their loving relative and live in total happiness." "Exactly. It's regrettable we didn't end up with an Aunt Loretta. Maybe a few other older tinies who could help Louis out." Shaking his head sadly, he added, "If only I hadn't lost so many early on." Evan knew all about the early failures. It was remarkable that they had now had 21 healthy, normal tinies. "The kids do like calling him Uncle Louis," he chuckled. "Gives them a sense of a special relationship." "That's right," the professor agreed. "They have Uncle Louis, so we need to stand back and remain objective." "We're not going to feel any emotion?" Evan queried, knowing how attached he felt already. The professor looked up from his work and smiled ruefully. "Our goal is to remain detached and objective," he reiterated. "I'm not saying it'll be easy." Evan nodded and handed him a few more eucalyptus. Changing the subject, he said, "If I were a tiny, I'd build my house on this hill." Pointing to the hill closest to him, Evan noted, "From here there is a fantastic view of the lake, even though it's surrounded by forest." "It is a great spot," the professor agreed. Scratching a small hole in the fertile, sterilized soil, he popped in another tree. "Maybe Louis will claim it." "I hope he does set up here," Evan stated with a chuckle, "especially since the control cave is directly underneath." Pausing to reflect where the next tree should go, Professor Lemans added, "I love the way the rain has already carved small gullies on the hills." "Did you see the waterfall yesterday?" Evan asked. An automatic sprinkler system, coined the Rainmaker, extended in a metal arch and ran flush against the dome ceiling. Tiny holes mimicked rainfall and generally watered the terrarium every night between 2 and 4 a.m. Evan had chosen a large granite rock to make the tallest hill, and just yesterday, after manually turning on the Rainmaker, he had noticed a waterfall streaming over the rock ledge and running through the lowlands. "Really? A waterfall?" the professor replied. "That'll be beautiful." A moment later, he said, "However, I guess it'll never be seen unless we occasionally turn on the rain during the day." "True," Evan agreed. "Maybe the odd rainy day will be a welcome novelty for them." Sunshine is much nicer," the professor replied, not fond of rainy days. Gesturing toward a hill without trees near the North Forest, the professor said, decided to leave that hill bare. If the Tinies ever build something with wheels, it is steep enough to have some fun. It even has a good bump in just the right spot. Mountain biking, you've thought of everything, Evan exclaimed with admiration, handing the professor another 5 trees. I hope so. Once everything has been released into this world, I really don't want to interfere. Aside from sending in daily supplies, and keeping them safe, of course, I want them to learn to be resourceful and independent. Holding out another 3 trees, Evan asked, "Where would you build your house, Professor?" Professor Lemans didn't hesitate. "Probably down by the orchard and gardens. Then I could keep on experimenting." Evan laughed. "That would be perfect for you." Glancing over to the east side of the dome, Evan admired the lush green rolling lowlands. He knew they would be excellent for farming. He and the professor had layered the soil with fine gravel and limestone for drainage, then well-rotted compost and a heavy layer of the best triple-mix soil they could buy. Already the little fruit orchards were taking root and growing strong along the newly formed but usually dry riverbed. The mining area lay in the northeast, round, grassy, and unforested. It was a large hill full of quartz, fine gravel, sand, piles of pebbles, and many, many flat building rocks. Far down, buried in those layers, was a lovely crystal suncatcher and some precious gems. They hoped the Tinies would, in time, find these treasures and use them in their own creative ways. In the building between the mining hill and the steep, bare hill with a bump, the professor had built the supply store. It was well stocked with useful items like building boards, wooden doweling, toothpicks, brass tacks, wire, and basic grocery supplies. The store even had a usable kitchen for food preparation, attached as it was to electricity and water below. Evan was proud of the non-polluting electric train he had set up that came in through a tunnel in the north end and delivered supplies directly to the store. It was just a simple in-and-out track through a highly secure tunnel system, but one that would allow himself and the professor to give the Tinies everything they needed to build, survive, and thrive. "Trees are in," Professor Lemans exclaimed happily, standing up and wiping his hands together. He stepped back one careful step on the shoreline to look at the forest. "I love it." "It's such a fantastic world," Evan agreed. "I wish I was a Tiny." "Me too," the professor laughed. Stepping into the lift pod, he raised himself up and out of the large terrarium. "So let's get it all in working order," Professor Lemans directed hastily as he swung down. "Today we will release the birds and animals and ensure everything is functioning well." Clapping his hands together, he added, "This is the moment I've been waiting for all these years. Finally, paradise will be filled with life and sound." Evan pressed the red button on the wall. With a quiet whir, the curved dome side slid slowly up and clicked back into place. Below the red button were 3 other buttons, a white, a blue, and a black. Evan pressed the white button, and rich, well-filtered, oxygenated air filled the dome, streaming in through a long round pipe with tiny holes that circumvented the terrarium just above the ground. To settle in the new plantings, Evan also pressed the blue button to activate the rainmaker. From the north side of the dome, the curved metal tubes skimmed along the arched ceiling of the dome, slowly and gently raining on the world below. It was a perfect rain. Not too hard, not too light, just sufficient to water the hills and the valleys and keep everything lush and green. "I want to see this waterfall," the professor exclaimed happily, walking over to stand beside Evan. "Stopwatch is set," Evan smiled, tapping his phone and holding it in view. "We'll get an accurate count how long it takes a waterfall to form." Enthralled by the beauty of their new little world, the 2 scientists watched with delighted anticipation. Sunshine was streaming in through the outer glass walls of the greenhouse, slanting down into the domed terrarium. Refracting through the fine spray inside, the rays formed a lovely rainbow. "Ooh la la, magnifique!" the professor called out. "Look now, the waterfall has started," Evan told him. "That took only 43 seconds once the rain hit the cliff." "Ah, I should have thought to put some ferns by the cliff," the professor called out regretfully. "How could I have forgotten to create ferns?" "Whatever we decide we need in the future, we can send in on the train," Evan reminded him. "Louis will see that they're planted." "True, true." The cascading water splashed down against the rocky cliff, gurgled eagerly through the soft farmland, and plunged merrily into the lake. For a few minutes, the 2 scientists stood in absolute bliss, admiring how well their glorious new world was functioning. Neither one had anticipated that a rainbow would stretch across the hills and valleys on opening day. Once they were satisfied that the new trees had settled in, Evan pressed the blue button to turn off the rain. They both hoped they would never have to use the black button. It was linked to the smoke sensors and the automatic emergency sprinklers. While the scientists waited 2 hours for the atmospheric conditions to regulate, they carefully monitored the computer programs to ensure that everything was in working order. And it was. When the jingle on his phone signaled time was up, Professor Lemans smiled at Evan triumphantly. "Let's do this," he said. Accessing the dome app on his phone, the professor found the animal nursery settings, scrolled to the door, and toggled the open-close switch. A distant whir sounded. He did the same for the tunnel entrance, and they both watched excitedly as the tunnel doors opened up inside the large terrarium. "Take pictures, Evan," he called out. "This is a day to remember. One day we'll be telling the whole world about our tiny experiment." Evan had his phone ready as the first rainbow lorikeets arrived, soaring up through the tunnel and then circling around inside the dome. When the colorful birds landed in the pine trees at the top of the highest hill, Evan took even more pictures. Bright little eastern bluebirds with their rosy red breasts were next, then northern cardinals and common loons, all the professor's favorites. A brown cow and 2 black-faced sheep ran in, mooing and baaing loudly as they kicked up their heels and danced all over the rolling pasture land. 2 puppies playfully chased after the frisky red squirrels. A few ducks waddled in, while 30 chickens ran past. Next, a tentative striped orange cat crept in cautiously, followed by leaping rabbits and 2 shy deer. There were even some insects, helpful insects, none of the annoying, destructive variety. Even though flies and mosquitoes would have provided ideal food for some of the birds, a decision had been made that formulated dry pellets would be supplied instead. Choosing their favorites, the professor and Evan had miniaturized the prettiest species of butterflies and moths, lots of honeybees and fireflies. Due to their short lifespan and proven infertility, the insects would have to be miniaturized and released every month. "Listen to our creation!" Evan exclaimed to the smiling professor. From the hidden microphone located under the school roof, songbird music was ringing through the speakers they had set up in the Paradise Room. Barks, moos, baas, squeaks, and a rooster crow added to the melody. "C'est fabuleux! This is fabulous!" the professor sighed happily. "Our perfect world has come to life. We've done it!" Our perfect world, Evan considered with a triumphant smile. Yet he had just the smallest twinge of conscience. It had taken years of research and effort to create the tinies and their wonderful world. But Evan knew they hadn't given life to anything. They'd only manipulated what already existed. Hastily, Evan dismissed the disconcerting thought, just as he had numerous times before. Opening a bottle of champagne purchased weeks ago for this very occasion, he joined the professor in joyfully celebrating their enormous accomplishment. "All these years of research have been completely worthwhile," Evan burst out with elation. "This is absolutely amazing. It's come together just as we hoped. Congratulations, Jacques Lemans." Chapter 3. Come What May. A cricket chirp interrupted the celebrations. The professor picked up his phone and glanced at the message. "Rachel needs my advice," he relayed to Evan. "The iguanas have been fighting again." With a shrug, Evan nodded. Professor Jacques Lemans oversaw everything that happened in the rainforest biome. "I'll tidy up," he offered. Clapping his assistant on the back, the professor took one more sip of champagne. "I'll be back in half an hour," he assured him. "Enjoy watching the animals discover paradise. We need to finish our celebration." Rushing into the elevator passageway, the professor didn't take a ride down into his underground laboratory, but instead darted left to go through a second set of sliding doors, which opened up into a long corridor. This corridor took him through the train loading and supply area, and then into the locked viewing hall, which had been built for the occasion when paradise would become a public exhibit in the rainforest biome. At the end, another locked door opened up into the mirrored hall, right near the reptile cafe. Rachel Khalid was standing outside the door. With a twinkle in her pretty blue eyes, she observed the professor's disheveled appearance. "I'm so curious about what you do in there," she confessed. You will be one of the first to know all about it, Jax promised the lovely dark-haired woman. Rachel Khalid was the head veterinarian at the Greenville Biosphere. She and her husband had immigrated from Israel and been supportive of almost everything the professor had ever suggested should happen in the biosphere. Often he wondered what they would think of the Paradise Project. He desperately hoped they would both be on his side. You always say I'll be the first to know, she teased, but you've been saying that for the last 4 years. When will I know, Jax? With a lengthy pause, Jax looked at her and smiled. Rachel rarely pressed hard, and he yearned to tell her everything and show her all around. Paradise was better than he had imagined. But he knew he couldn't. Not just yet. I hope the new display will be open next summer, he said earnestly. If not, at least by the end of next year. You've no idea how mystified I am, she laughed. Everyone is. Everyone that knows, that is, she clarified quickly. We haven't told anyone that you spend so much time in there. And we is just the 3 of you, Jax confirmed. Yes, Farouk and I and Tim. Farouk was Rachel's husband, and Tim was the maintenance man. Rachel and Tim noticed everything that went on in the public part of the rainforest biome. So, there's been another lizard battle, Jax inquired, trying to change the subject and hoping to get back in time to celebrate with Evan. Come have a look at Bert, she said, leading him in behind the spectacular 10-meter-high waterfall. A plexiglass tunnel kept the small animal care center safe and dry from the cascading water on the other side. Large, clear aquariums lined the farm wall. Rachel pointed to the green iguana that had been attacked. Deep scratches adorned his front leg. Crouching perfectly still inside his glass walls, the iguana's eyes roved in various directions. This is the 4th time poor Bert has been mauled, she complained, pointing to the wounds which had already been cleaned. I think it's time we had Timbo shipped to a pet store or rehomed. He is far too aggressive. I agree, Jax nodded sadly, gazing at the old scars from former battles on Bert's shoulder. Timbo is a beauty, but Bert has a gentler disposition. If I had to choose between them, I'd pick Bert. Wonderful, then we both agree, Rachel smiled. I'll call the pet store in the morning. Thanks so much for all that you do, Rachel, Jax expressed earnestly. I always know the animals and birds are in competent hands. I appreciate you asking me for advice on the iguanas, but I'm also quite happy for you to act on your own good judgment. Thank you, she smiled. Maybe I could also inquire if the pet store wants a macaw. No, not Molly, Jax called out in mock dismay. He knew Rachel would never give Molly away, even if the colorful bird did have a nasty habit of nipping whenever Rachel had to handle her. Sharing a laugh, the two parted company, and Jax Lemans returned to the mirrored hallway. Since it was after 7, the biome was closed for the day, and Tim, the maintenance man, had gone home. Rachel was still in the care center, so Jax took a drop-floor exit so he could check on the tinies. Leaving the lights off so the children wouldn't see him as he walked past, the professor gazed fondly into the glowing nursery. Louis was attempting to help Odin read a novel, but Odin was flailing his arms up in frustration and trying to slip away. A group of girls were drawing with markers, and some of the boys were playing tag from room to room. Tomorrow, he thought, they will finally have space to run and play. There will be so much for them to do. With a happy smile, he murmured, I can't wait for tomorrow. Riding the elevator upstairs, the professor was glad to see Evan was still in the Paradise room, and all the tools were sterilized and back in the bin. Having finished cleaning up, Evan was watching the animals frolic in the grass. How did that go? Evan asked. Well enough, Professor Lemans replied. Bert was badly scratched again, so we've decided to put Timbo up for adoption. They discussed Timbo's past misdeeds and agreed he had to go, even though he was undeniably the biggest and best specimen of his kind, and fondly named by the maintenance man. Rachel asked again when Paradise will be open to the public, the professor relayed. I do wish she could have been in on this from the beginning. Rachel would have a lot to offer, Evan agreed. She's a mom. She has keen insights. The girls especially would benefit from a female mentor. He waggled his blonde eyebrows. But then she'd be an accomplice. If the world doesn't perceive this research experiment as well as we hope they will. With a deep sigh, the professor nodded. Yes, Best to keep her in the dark until we're ready to reveal the happiest place on earth to everyone. Surely the benefits of this research will outweigh a few questionable ethics." "And if they don't?" Evan smiled. The professor turned to him. "As I've said many times, I sincerely hope this experiment won't cause you any disadvantage, Evan," he implored. "You know I will take all the blame, whatever it is. Regardless of whether or not they take away my research capabilities or imprison me, or call you a mad scientist," Evan grinned. "Ça alors, whatever they do to me, this project has been the restoration of real joy in my life. If everything is perceived in a negative light, which I certainly hope it will not, I trust that my relationship and care for the tinies will be seen as an integral part of their survival. I know many teams will be sent in to manage their lives and oversee everything that goes on. Sure hope no one sues us." "It is a possibility," Professor Lemans admitted thoughtfully. "But if everyone falls in love with the tinies, they may not. The world may donate to our cause instead." Reaching out to clap Evan on the shoulder, the professor assured him, "Whatever they do, I will cover for you the best that I can, I promise. And I will never regret my part in this. Many scientists have been misunderstood and blacklisted as a result of their investigations and discoveries. The world doesn't always understand, initially. Think of how they treated Galileo, and Marcello Malpighi, or Gerhard Domaka. Or the physician who discovered that hand-washing was the key to preventing disease," Evan added. "Ah, yes. Ignaz Semmelweis," he agreed. "Good example. So I may pay heavily for my opportunity to advance scientific knowledge, but I'd rather pay and contribute something significant than live my life as a free man, never exploring the insights and opportunities that have come my way. After all, the end justifies the means." Evan looked up. The professor often made reference to the end justifying the means, and Evan wasn't entirely sure it was right. Did the end always justify the means? Gazing wistfully at the two puppies dashing around the orchard, Evan asked, "Do you sometimes wish we could just keep this a secret forever?" "For longer, yes," the professor nodded. "But since we've come to realize how fast the tinies age, we must share this experiment while they are still in their prime. No one will be enamored by a world full of aging, dying creatures." "So true," Evan agreed, watching the beagle pup playfully approach the orange-striped cat and quickly jump back with a scratch to his nose. He chuckled, and then with a nod, he reiterated the professor's concerns. "We must share paradise with the world in a year or two, or we will have no hope of a positive response." Turning to look at the professor steadfastly, Evan said, "I want you to know that whatever happens to us as a result of this, I will always be thankful to have taken part in the most exciting, creative, phenomenal research project that I could ever imagine. This," he affirmed, gesturing towards the dome, "has fulfilled every aspiration I ever had to be a scientist." "And without you, I would have failed to accomplish my dream," the professor smiled, picking up his half-empty glass of champagne. He presented a toast. "To you. To us, to successful miniaturization, to a family of tinies, and to an opportunity to show the world that true happiness can be found in a kinder and safer environment." Chapter 4. Getting Ready. After Evan had gone home that night, the professor sat down at his desk. The glow from his phone lit up the darkened paradise room. For a few moments, he leaned back in his padded chair and gazed up at the peaceful sky. Little stars twinkled through the crisscrossed panes of glass which formed the strong greenhouse structure. It wasn't often that Jack Lemans took time to relax, but now, finally, everything was ready. The intense preparations were over, and his new world was alive and fully functional. The cow moved over the speakers, and Jack smiled. "What a lovely sound," he thought to himself. "I can't wait to sit in here and listen to the children talking to each other. Finally, my little family will have a beautiful world of their own." For a few more minutes, Jack enjoyed his quiet reverie. As an only child growing up, he'd often wished he'd been one of many siblings. Now, as a lonely adult, he yearned for a family. In many ways, he was living his life in dreams again through the tinies, even though he tried to tell himself and Evan that he would remain detached, as this was primarily a research project. In all truthfulness, tomorrow's entrance into paradise was just as exciting for him as he hoped it would be for them. A cricket chirp alerted him to an incoming message. Louis was requesting to talk, just as he always did once all the children were in bed. Down in the nursery, Louis had access to a small, private, soundproof chamber with a smartphone. It was here that he had communicated with the professor since his earliest days. It was here that he had done his remote learning, watching educational videos, reading, studying, and answering questions online. Pressing the White Dove app, the professor answered the video call. "Hi," Louis said with a smile lighting up his aging face. "How'd it go today? I heard the doors open and the animals leave. Are they enjoying paradise?" "They are loving it," the professor rejoiced. "All went well today. Tomorrow you and the children will join them and see for yourselves." "I'm so thrilled to hear this," Louis exclaimed. "I probably won't sleep tonight just thinking about it." "Well, we do have some last-minute things to go over," the professor relayed with a chuckle. "So I'm glad you weren't planning a long sleep. Did you take the first aid exam?" "Yes," Louis smiled. "I scored 89 out of 90. I only missed one of the 4 signs of a stroke." "Well done," the professor praised earnestly. He was very proud of Louis's abilities to learn and recall information. "Did you finish all the swimming videos?" Louis sighed. "I've watched at least 20, and I feel I understand the theory. It just may be a little hard to teach something I've never done before myself." "No doubt," the professor agreed, raising his eyebrows and nodding vigorously. "Teaching the kids to swim will be challenging. Hopefully some will catch on quickly and be able to demonstrate the strokes to others." "I spent a lot of time reading about drowning prevention and water safety tips," Louis assured him. "I am trying to emphasize this with all the children before anyone steps a foot into the water." "Good, good. There'll be much fun to be had in the lake. I want them all to enjoy it fully. But the water does pose one of the greatest risks to their safety. I do sometimes wonder if perhaps a shallow wading pool might have been a better option. But then they couldn't fish or—" "I will help them stay safe," Louis promised. "Thank you." "What lessons do you want me to cover when we're finished with swimming and water safety?" Louis asked. "I'll be sending in some more books," the professor told him. "It's important to get their reading level up so they can read complex instructions on how to build and create. And we should cover fractions, multiplication, and division. I also want them to understand their anatomy so we can delve into first aid when they're a few months older." "Should we look at animal care?" Louis suggested. "Ah, yes, I have some excellent books and materials on this. To be good stewards of paradise, they will need to understand the importance of feeding and training the animals. I'll be sending in kibble for the cat and dogs and pellets for the birds and chickens, but the others will be fine on vegetarian diets or fish. Anyway, you'll see all that exact information in the notes I'll be sending in." "We should improve their writing skills so that they can communicate well in the future." Yes, Jacques Lemans agreed. "I printed some small workbooks for that purpose. And then there will be so many practical things to learn, like measuring, using a saw to cut building boards, framing houses, windows and doors, growing gardens, food preparation, useful chemical reactions, maintaining forests, catching fish. You've got plenty to cover for at least a year." The conversation shifted to the principles of servant leadership, which the professor had been gradually sharing with Louis night after night, ever since the children were little. He wanted to be sure that paradise would be led by selfless example and with plenty of kindness, empathy, and love. Thankfully, Louis was very receptive to the concepts. He was naturally a kind and loving individual who had enjoyed the children coming into his life from day one, even if the first 2 months of diapers and bottles had occasionally overwhelmed him. "What are the 10 most important principles of servant leadership?" the professor quizzed. Louis had them well memorized, and he listed them out. Listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to growth, and building community. Excellent. For at least an hour, they discussed some of the principles in more depth. Louis was fully committed to the ideas, and even in the nursery, he had often demonstrated his understanding in amazing ways. "I have full confidence in you, Louis," the professor smiled. I'll never forget all the mornings I would walk past the nursery and see you asleep in your bed with numerous babies on each side." "Ah, yes, some just couldn't go to sleep on their own," Louis reminisced with a chuckle. "I'd fall asleep patting their backs." "You did well," the professor praised. "I wish you hadn't been so alone looking after them. As you know, it's not what I intended." Louis sighed. It would have been wonderful to have had another tiny his own age, especially a wife. But after 4 years on his own, the children were a welcome addition. "I'm very happy I'm not all alone anymore," Louis assured him. "It was a lot of work for a couple of months, but now I look forward to every day. I love the children. Sharing paradise with them will be my dream come true." "Tomorrow, then," the professor promised earnestly. "As soon as you've all had breakfast, I'll open the doors and you can walk in." "Tomorrow," Louis reiterated. "Tomorrow will be the day." Chapter 5. Today's the Day. Amy woke up when the large metal door opened. She knew that the creaking sound meant Evan was visiting. Bright lights flooded into the large nursery windows, lighting up the row of 10 little wooden beds lined against the wall. Sitting up, Amy pulled her long copper-brown hair into a tidy ponytail and pushed off the pink fleece blanket. "Today's the day," she called out, her bright blue eyes sparkling with elation. Hopping out of bed, she danced around the room that she shared with the 9 other tiny girls. "We're going to the new world today," she sang. Santa and Georgia were instantly awake. "Hooray!" they cried out, jumping out of bed. "Today is the day." "I want to see the water," Santa sang, clapping her hands and kicking her brown feet from side to side, "and flowers." "And all the things that Uncle Louis drew for us," tall blonde Georgia added, running over to dance with Amy around the room. "It's going to be our home forever," Amy sang happily. "I hope there will still be a Wonder Drink station," Dia moaned, rolling over in bed. Dia was the smallest girl. She looked just like the Indian princess in the book that Uncle Louis had read to them. "We will grow our own food," Amy reminded her, "or make something to trade for food from the store." "I just want Wonder Drink," Dia pouted, sitting up and brushing her thick black hair with one of the pink plastic brushes that Evan had given them. "Me too," whined Rosa, heaving her plump self out of the small wooden bed. "Why can't the professor just keep giving us Wonder Drink?" "Because he wants us to have fun," Santa encouraged, pulling her colorful shawl over her nightgown. "Remember, Uncle Louis said that growing things is so much fun." "And it teaches us to be industrious," Nancy added, recalling Uncle Louis's lessons from the day before. "We will be happiest if we contribute to our community." A whirring sound alerted the girls to new supplies entering their room. With great excitement, they ran over to the delivery area to have a look. Nancy pulled open the door to the sliding compartment under the window and dragged in a box. It was full of new clothes. Every few weeks, a box of clothes would come through in the same manner, and it was always so exciting. "Oh, I love this dress," Amy said, holding up a blue sundress with little white flowers. Wispy gauze strips hung from the shoulder straps. The girls called them ribbons. Santa pulled out a very small sparkly pink top and shorts with lace and sequins. "This is for Dia," she said immediately, tossing it over to her. There was always one extra small item that would only fit Dia. Seeing the sparkles and sequins, Dia's eyes lit up eagerly. She put on the new clothes. Then she waltzed over to view herself in the glass reflection of the window. She considered carefully. "This top could be just a little tighter, but it will do." Lily looked over at Dia enviously and wrinkled her freckled nose. "I don't know why you get all the small clothes. I'm not that much bigger, you know." "If it has sparkles, then it's mine," Dia proclaimed, looking at herself sideways. Tossing her straight brown hair back proudly, Lily picked up a sundress that Georgia had decided was too small. It hung loosely, but she liked the orange flowers that were embroidered on the hem. "I wonder why all the clothes have a little capital F and P on them," Amy remarked, very pleased that the pretty blue dress fit. No one understood the FP label, having never heard of brand names, but they all briefly examined the decal on their own items. "This is for me," Santa laughed, having reached the bottom of the pile. She held up a bright turquoise dress and slipped it on. Ooh, I can move in this, she laughed, dancing all around. And there aren't so many ribbons. I don't like ribbons. I just love color. Almost everyone had found something they liked to wear except one. Nothing fits me, Rosa complained, unable to pull on even the loosest dress. Everyone looked at Rosa. She was much rounder than the others. Finally, in a tentative voice, Santa said, "You can have my shawl if you want. It's big on me." Amy looked up in surprise. She knew that Santa loved her multicolored shawl. "Okay," Rosa said, tossing back her shiny blonde curls. "I'll try it on." The shawl was unrestrictive. Rosa was pleased to revamp her wardrobe with the colorful shawl, but forgot to say thank you. And she didn't seem to appreciate how hard it had been for Santa to give up her favorite accessory. When Rosa turned her back, Amy reached out to give sad Santa a quick hug. "That was really nice of you," she said quietly. Santa sighed and hugged Amy back. Hugs were special among the tinies, and not everyone gave them so freely. "Thank you," she said. Yu Yan stood by the glass window with Tina and Vinitha, admiring her new clothes in the dim reflection. With a distinctively Asian appearance and in the petite category with Dia and Lily, dark-haired Yu Yan had found a flowered top with a matching skirt. In keeping with the FP clothing, wispy ribbons hung from the shirt sleeves. Tina was neither tall nor short, and she was rather plain. She generally kept her long brown hair up in a bun. Twirling around, she was pleased that her simple skirt and blouse had only minimal decorations. Vinitha, with her dark wavy tresses and cinnamon-colored skin, always looked particularly stunning. She was trying on a new purple top. Yu Yan lifted the large book they had been reading in the nursery the night before and asked Vinitha to help her carry it back to the library. "Of course," Vinitha said sweetly, doing up the ribbons. She had one last look at her window reflection, gave herself a pleased smile, and ran over to help Yu Yan. "I'll help too," Tina volunteered, taking another corner. "I wonder if there will be books in paradise." "I hope so," Yu Yan smiled gently. "What would we do without books?" "I know," Vinitha agreed. "I could read them all day, but I do wish they were a little smaller." There was a tap on the common room window, and all the girls who weren't carrying books ran from their own room into the other. A large, smiling face with spiky blonde hair was peering in. "Evan!" they shouted happily. "When do we go into the new world?" Georgia asked, pressing her pretty face up against the window. Stooping over to speak into the microphone, Evan answered, "Breakfast first, and then the doors will open. Get your wonder drink, everyone, and pack up your stuff. If you put it inside the delivery area in your rooms, I'll make sure your things get to you in paradise." With great delight, Georgia, Santa, and Amy walked over to the wonder drink station, chatting excitedly about the new world. They could hardly wait to see it. Amy didn't feel hungry and wished they could skip breakfast and go in right away. Lots of loud stamping and shouting indicated the boys were coming out of their room as well. Swarthy Zahir came out whistling a merry tune. He and Vahid looked quite dapper in their new vests, flowing white shirts, and knee-length shorts. However, they had ripped all the hanging ribbons off their clothing, which left a few holes here and there. Bronze Ponce and Small Charlie were right behind, with the same new outfits. In fact, as the boys tumbled out of their room, Amy noticed that all their outfits were identical. Odin and Damien pushed past everyone to be first in line. They were the biggest tinies. The others complained, but didn't stop them. The Wonder Drink station had 2 nozzles within easy reach. Each child had their own big cup and had written their name on it. Filling their cups with the delicious creamy mixture, the kids usually drank their breakfast quickly. Uncle Louis referred to it as breakfast in the morning, but they had the same Wonder Drink every meal. Soon everyone had gathered in the common room with cups in hand. "I haven't had any yet," Rosa complained, tugging gently on Odin's long white blonde hair. Odin was filling his cup for the 3rd time. "I'm not done yet," Odin said in a grouchy tone of voice. Generally, Odin and Damien stood in front of the station and filled their cups over and over. Odin was very round and barely fit in his new clothes, and Damien was the tallest. They always insisted on drinking to their fill before they moved away. Rosa started crying. Nancy reached out for Rosa's cup, barged in front of Damien, and filled it for her. It was a common morning occurrence, although no one ever dared push in front of Odin. Uncle Louis walked out of his private room to check on the kids. "Oh, you have a new outfit too," Amy exclaimed. Rubbing down his vest, Uncle Louis looked pleased. "Yes, we're all heading to paradise in style," he laughed. Just like the boys, Uncle Louis had a flowing white shirt, fancy brown vest, and knee-length fringe pants. "Make sure you drink enough for breakfast," he told them all. "We have a busy morning ahead of us." Once she had taken a couple sips of wonder drink, Amy washed her cup in the sink that was built into the common room wall and left it to dry on the counter. With great delight, she ran to the girls' room to pack her pillow, blanket, and clothes into her little bed. "Why are you sad?" Amy asked. "We're going to miss the nursery," Rosa lamented. "It's cozy here." "We'll have cozy places in paradise," Amy assured her. Yu-Yan nodded. "And there'll be so much more to do in paradise," she told her friend. "But we've been here all our lives. This is our home," Rosa wailed. Amy looked around the plain nursery. It had been cozy and was filled with lots of good memories, but she was confident paradise would be even better. "I'll help you pack your stuff," she said. Picking up Rosa's blanket, she folded it neatly. Yu-Yan gathered Rosa's brush and nightgown off the floor and tucked them into her bed. "Come on, Rosa," she encouraged. "It won't be so cozy here when everyone else has gone." Reluctantly, Rosa stood up. Amy and Yu-Yan dragged Rosa's bed over to the delivery area, just as Evan had said. Then they ran back and gathered their own belongings together. Overjoyed that the big day had finally come, Amy ran into the common room. She couldn't restrain the melody filling her heart. "I love today," she sang, trilling around in a new blue dress, enjoying the way the ribbons floated past her arms. "We're going away to play all day in the brand new world." "World doesn't rhyme," Zahira pointed out thoughtfully. "I know, but I couldn't think of anything else," she shrugged. The tall, dark-haired boy with the gentle blue eyes frowned, deep in thought. He hummed her tune. With a sudden smile, he sang, "By the brand new bay." Amy looked at him with awe. "You have such a nice voice," she raved. She had never heard Zahir sing before. Usually he just whistled. A rosy red brightened Zahir's dark olive complexion. "What's a bay?" Amy asked. "Well, it's sort of like a bunch of water," Zahir shrugged. He raised one of his well-defined eyebrows. "And the New World has a lot of water." "You know so much," Amy praised. Zahir looked flustered, but even though he didn't know the true meaning of a bay, Zahir did know a lot. Like Yu-Yan, Tina, Vanitha, and Amy, Zahir had caught on quickly to reading and had now read every book in the nursery. Amy tried out her song with the new ending. She liked it, so she kept singing. Soon Zahir, Lima, Georgia, and Santa joined in. Rosa was too sad to sing. Odin and Franz told them to stop the noise, but the other children were too happy to just stand quietly waiting for the doors to open. Yelling loudly, Odin and Franz clapped their hands over their ears and ran back into the boys' room. As soon as everyone had finished breakfast, washed out their cups, and packed their boxes, Uncle Louis asked them to get into a line. Standing in the common room by the big doors that had never opened before, Uncle Louis held up his hand to get their attention. Amy stopped singing. She was very excited to see the doors open. What does paradise look like? She wondered eagerly. Everyone quieted down except for Ponzi. Ponzi kept talking to Odin, wondering how they would build forts in paradise. "That's enough, Ponzi," Uncle Louis said. All the kids gave Ponzi a dirty look. He responded better to his peers than to the teacher. He stopped talking. "We don't want there to be any running or pushing," Uncle Louis reminded them. "We are going to walk up this tunnel ramp slowly so that no one gets hurt. When you get to the New World, you can run and jump and shout and go wherever you like." There were loud cheers. "And just remember," Uncle Louis pleaded, "what I said about the water. I don't want anyone to drown, so please don't go into the lake without me. We will be doing swimming lessons during school, and when you learn how to swim, then and only then will you be safe to go into the water by yourselves."